My work is play, and I play when I design. I even looked it up in the dictionary to make sure that I actually do that. And the definition of play, number 1 was engaging in a childlike activity or endeavor, and number 2 was gambling. And I realize I do both when I'm designing. I'm both a kid and I'm gambling all the time. And I think that if you're not, there's probably something inherently wrong with the structure of the situation you're in if you're a designer. But the serious part is what threw me, and I couldn't quite get a handle on it until I remembered an essay. And it's an essay I read 30 years ago. It was written by Russell Baker, who used to write an Observer column in the New York Times. He's a wonderful humorist. And I'm going to read you this essay, or an excerpt from it, because it really hit home for me. Here is a letter of friendly advice. Be serious, it says. What it means, of course, is be solemn. Being solemn is easy. Being serious is hard. Children almost always begin by being serious, which is what makes them so entertaining when compared with adults as a class. Adults, on the whole, are solemn. In politics, the rare candidate who is serious, like Adlai Stevenson, is easily overwhelmed by one who is solemn, like Eisenhower. That's because it's hard for most people to recognize seriousness, which is rare, but more comfortable to endorse solemnity, which is commonplace. Jogging, which is commonplace and widely accepted as good for you, is solemn. Poker is serious. Washington, D.C. is solemn. New York is serious. Going to educational conferences to tell you anything about the future is solemn. Taking a long walk by yourself during which you devise a foolproof scheme for robbing Tiffany's is serious. Now, when I apply Russell Baker's definition of solemnity or seriousness to design, it doesn't necessarily make any particular point about quality. Solemn design is often important and very effective design. Solemn design is also socially correct and is accepted by appropriate audiences. It's what right-thinking designers and clients are striving for. Serious design, serious play is something else. For one thing, it often happens spontaneously, intuitively, accidentally, or incidentally. It can be achieved out of innocence or arrogance or out of selfishness, sometimes out of carelessness. But mostly, it's achieved through all those kind of crazy parts of human behavior that don't really make any sense. Serious design is imperfect. It's filled with the kind of craft flaws that come from something being the first of its kind. Serious design is also often quite unsuccessful from a solemn point of view. That's because the art of serious play is about invention, change, rebellion, not perfection. Perfection happens during solemn play. Now, I always saw design careers like surreal staircases. If you look at this staircase, you'll see that in your 20s, the risers are very high and the steps are very short, and you make huge discoveries. You sort of leap up very quickly in your youth. That's because you don't know anything and you have a lot to learn, and so that anything you do is a learning experience and you're just jumping right up there. As you get older, the risers get shallower and the steps get wider, and you start moving along at a slower pace because you're making fewer discoveries. And as you get older and more decrepit, you sort of inch along on this sort of depressing long staircase leading you into oblivion. I find it's actually getting really hard to be serious. I'm hired to be solemn, but I find more and more that I'm solemn when I don't have to be. And in my 35 years of working experience, I think I was really serious 4 times. And I'm going to show them to you now because they came out of very specific conditions. It's great to be a kid. Now, when I was in my early 20s, I worked in the record business designing record covers for CBS Records, and I had no idea what a great job I had. I thought everybody had a job like that. And the way I looked at design and the way I looked at the world was what was going on around me, and the things that came at the time I walked into design were the enemy. I really, really, really hated the typeface Helvetica. I thought the typeface Helvetica was the cleanest, most boring, most fascistic, really repressive typeface, and I hated everything that was designed in Helvetica. And when I was in my college days, This was the sort of design that was fashionable and popular. This is actually quite a lovely book jacket by Rudy de Herrick, but I just hated it because it was designed with Helvetica, and I made parodies about it. I just thought it was, completely boring. So my goal in life was to do stuff that wasn't made out of Helvetica. And to do stuff that wasn't made out of Helvetica was actually kind of hard because you had to find it. And there weren't a lot of books about the history of design in the early 70s. There wasn't a plethora of design publishing. You actually had to go to antique stores. You had to go to Europe. You had to go places and find the stuff. And what I responded to was, Art Nouveau or Deco or Victorian typography or things that were just completely not Helvetica. And I taught myself design this way, and this was sort of my early years. And I used these things in really goofy ways on record covers and in my design. I wasn't educated. I just sort of put these things together. I mixed up Victorian designs with pop, and I mixed up Art Nouveau with something else. And I made these very lush, very elaborate record covers, not because I was being a postmodernist or a historicist, because I didn't know what those things were. I just hated Helvetica. And that kind of passion drove me into very serious play, a kind of play I could never do now because I'm too well educated. And there's something wonderful about that form of youth where you can let yourself grow and play and be really a brat and then accomplish things. By the end of the 70s, actually, this stuff became known. I mean, these covers appeared all over the world, and they started winning awards, and people knew them, and I was suddenly a postmodernist, and I began a career in my own business, and first I was praised for it, then criticized for it, but the fact of the matter was I had become solemn. I didn't do what I think was a piece of serious work again for about 14 years. I spent most of the 80s being quite solemnly turning out these sorts of designs that I was expected to do because that's who I was, and I was living in this cycle of going from serious to solemn to hackneyed to dead and getting rediscovered all over again.